The black waitress said, "Sir, that's my mother's signature." The crystal glass slipped from the billionaire CEO's hands, shattering against the Italian marble of the Golden Terrace, the city's most expensive restaurant. The sharp crash cut through the elegant murmur of the main hall like a knife. All eyes turned to table 12, where David Richardson, CEO of Richardson Tech Industries, stood pale as a ghost, staring at the 24-year-old waitress who had just spoken words that threatened to shake his $50 billion empire. Kesha Williams never imagined her life would change while serving grilled salmon and Dom Perignon champagne. She had worked at the Golden Terrace for 3 years, swallowing racist comments disguised as jokes and enduring condescending smiles from customers who barely saw her as human. But in that moment, holding the water jug with steady hands, she was no longer invisible. "Excuse me, what did you say?" Richardson stammered, his usual baritone reduced to a hoarse whisper. Beside him, 2 Japanese investors watched in confusion as the powerful businessman crumbled. Before a black employee, Kesha pointed a trembling finger at the document Richardson had proudly displayed. Just moments before, the original design for Richardson solar panels, the very technology that transformed a mediocre entrepreneur into one of the richest men in America. In the lower right corner was an elegant, unmistakable signature. Dr. Amelia R. Williams. 2003, I said, Kesha repeated, her voice gaining strength. "That's my mother's signature, Dr. Amelia." "Williams, the woman you claimed, died in a lab accident 21 years ago." The flashback was inevitable. Kesha had been only 3 years old when soldiers arrived at the modest home she shared with her mother, a brilliant chemical engineer specializing in renewable energy. Explosion in the lab, they had said. Chemical accident. Unrecognizable body, they explained, never allowing a funeral. Just a small urn delivered a week later, and a paltry compensation from the company, where Amelia worked as a junior researcher. That company was Richardson Technologies, and the empire was born exactly 6 months after Amelia Williams' death. "Security," Richardson barked, regaining some composure, though his trembling hands betrayed him as he tried to hide the document. "This woman is delusional. Get her out of here!" The restaurant manager, Mr. Morrison, a 50-year-old white man accustomed to pleasing billionaires, hurried over nervously. "Kesha, please, go back to the kitchen. We'll talk later." But Kesha didn't move. For years, she had studied every photo, every document, every memory of her mother she managed to preserve. She knew that cursive handwriting better than her own. Now, watching Richardson try to hide the evidence, an old suspicion finally took shape. 21 years, she murmured, loud enough for all to hear. "Exactly 21 years since my mother died, and you became a solar energy genius. What an interesting coincidence, don't you think?" The Japanese investors exchanged uneasy glances. One whispered in Japanese to the other. Richardson's mask of corporate benevolence began to crack, revealing something much darker beneath. This person is clearly disturbed," he growled at Morrison. "I want her fired immediately. And if this fantasy makes it onto social media or into the press, I'll sue this establishment for defamation." Kesha smiled, for the first time in 3 years of silent humiliation. It was a smile Richardson couldn't decipher, but one he should have feared. The smile of someone who had just found the loose thread that could unravel an empire built on lies. As security closed in, she whispered just loud enough for him to hear. "You didn't just kill my mother, did you? You killed everyone else who knew the truth about who really invented this technology." Richardson froze. How the hell did she know about the others? There, amid the chaos of a luxury restaurant and the stares of the financial elite, Kesha carried a secret powerful enough to rewrite the history of the world's largest renewable energy company. The dismissal came even before security arrived. Morrison, sweating coldly at the threat of Richardson suing the restaurant, did not hesitate. "Kesha Williams, you are fired for inappropriate conduct and disruption of the workplace. Hand in your apron and leave immediately." Richardson adjusted his Italian silk tie, as if straightening fabric could restore his shattered dignity. "This woman clearly suffers from serious mental illness. She probably saw my name in a magazine and invented this pathetic fantasy for attention. But Japanese investors, Tanaka and Yamamoto, exchanged wary looks. Tanaka leaned toward his colleague and whispered something Richardson couldn't understand, but the tone was unmistakably suspicious. "Mr. Richardson," Tanaka said carefully, "perhaps it would be best to reschedule our meeting. It seems unexpected complications have arisen." "Absolutely not!" Richardson roared, slamming his fist against the table. Cutlery rattled. "I will not allow a deranged waitress to sabotage billion-dollar deals with ridiculous lies." But Kesha didn't move. Even as security advanced, she stood calmly, her steady gaze unsettling Richardson more than any outburst could. 21 years is a long time to keep secrets. "Mr. Richardson," she said softly, yet her voice cut through the restaurant's noise like steel. But not long enough to forget a mother. A chill ran down Richardson's spine. The way she said "keep secrets" suggested she knew much, much more. Now, as the two uniformed men finally reached the table, Kesha smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was cold, calculated. "You know what else is interesting, Mr. Richardson? My mother always said she kept copies of everything. Every experiment, every discovery, every private conversation with the bosses." Richardson's blood ran cold. Private conversations. How the hell did she... "This woman is delusional," he yelled at the security guards, though his voice came out higher-pitched than he intended. "Get her out of here before she causes any more trouble." The guards hesitated. Kesha wasn't being aggressive or violent. In fact, she seemed dangerously calm for someone who had just lost her job in such a humiliating way. "Don't worry," Kesha said gently, raising her hands in surrender. "I'll leave on my own." "But Mr. Richardson..." She turned back to him, her gaze steady. "Maybe you should call your lawyers. You're going to need them very soon." And then she did something no one expected. Kesha pulled her cell phone from her pocket and held it up to Richardson. On the screen was an old, faded photo, yet unmistakable. A young black woman in a white lab coat smiled beside a younger man who was clearly David Richardson. "More than 2 decades ago, my mother kept a lot of photos, Mr. Richardson, and a lot of other things, too." Richardson felt as though the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. He remembered that day Amelia had insisted on taking the photo to commemorate the partnership. He thought all the evidence had been destroyed in the accident. "Impossible," he muttered, instinctively reaching for the phone. "All the photos were... there are no more photos." "Were what, Mr. Richardson?" Kesha tilted her head, feigning innocence. "Destroyed? In the same accident that killed my mother? The Japanese investors didn't need to understand every nuance of English to realize they were witnessing something far beyond a disgruntled employee confronting her boss." Tanaka quietly began slipping his documents back into his briefcase. Kesha's voice grew stronger. "You know, I always found it strange how you managed to develop solar panel technology so quickly after her death, almost as if you already had everything ready, just waiting for the right moment to present it as your own creation." "You have no idea what you're talking about," Richardson growled, his composure slipping. "Your mother was a junior researcher, an assistant. I developed all the technology, assistant." Kesha laughed, though it was a joyless laugh. "My mother had a PhD in chemical engineering from MIT and 2 postdoctorates in renewable energy. But of course, to you, she was just an assistant, right?" Richardson's polished mask was cracking, replaced by something primitive and desperate. "It doesn't matter how many degrees she had. I had the contacts, the funding, the business acumen. Without me, her ideas would have died in a university lab." Kesha's eyes sharpened. "So you admit they were her ideas?" Richardson froze, realizing his mistake. In less than 5 minutes, this waitress had extracted more from him than federal investigators could in months, and she was recording everything. Kesha saw the recognition in his eyes and smiled again. That same cold smile that unsettled him to his core. "Thank you for the confession, Mr. Richardson. It will be very useful." "Enough!" Richardson exploded, standing so abruptly that he knocked over his chair. "I'm not going to stand here and listen to delusional accusations from a what, Mr. Richardson?" Kesha interrupted, her voice sharp as glass. "Finish the sentence." The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone in the restaurant was watching, waiting to see what word would leave the mouth of the billionaire philanthropist who claimed to champion racial equality. Richardson clenched his fists, his face burning red with impotent rage. He wanted to finish the sentence. He wanted to use the words he really thought. But there were too many witnesses. Too many cell phone cameras now pointed his way. "Security," he said through clenched teeth. "If she doesn't leave voluntarily, remove her by force." But Kesha was already slipping her phone back into her pocket, turning toward the exit. "It won't be necessary. I've already gotten what I came for." As she walked past the Japanese investors' table, she stopped and bowed slightly. "Gentlemen," she said politely, in flawless Japanese. It might be best to investigate Mr. Richardson's background more thoroughly before finalizing any agreement. Some recent discoveries could significantly affect the company's reputation. Tanaka and Yamamoto exchanged startled glances, impressed not only by her fluency but by the respectful formality with which she spoke, a stark contrast to Richardson's arrogance. "Irato goyasu," Tanaka replied with a respectful bow. Richardson watched the exchange in horror. "What are you saying? What the hell is going on here?" But Kesha was already at the door. She turned one last time, her voice rising above the restaurant. "To everyone who is recording, and I know you are, post it on social media with justice for Amelia. It's time the world learns the truth about David Richardson." And then she was gone, leaving behind a panicked billionaire, skeptical investors, and an entire room of witnesses who had just seen history shift before their eyes. Richardson collapsed into his chair, the weight of reality finally piercing his arrogance. This was no delusional waitress. She was Amelia Williams' daughter, and she had spent 21 years preparing for this moment. What Richardson didn't yet know was that the real storm was only beginning. Kesha hadn't just kept photos and documents. She had built a network, gathered evidence, and planned every move with the precision of a master chess player. Richardson thought he had won 21 years ago. In reality, he had only given Kesha enough time to prepare a revenge that would destroy not only his fortune but the entire foundation of lies on which he'd built his empire. In the 3 days following the confrontation at the Golden Terrace, Kesha quickly discovered the extent of David Richardson's power. First, she was summarily fired, with no unemployment benefits and a negative reference that made finding another job in hospitality nearly impossible. Then came the smaller acts of sabotage. Her bank account was mysteriously frozen pending a tax investigation, and her name began appearing on lists of problem employees circulated discreetly among elite employers. Richardson assumed he was dealing with a desperate young woman who would buckle under financial pressure in days. What he didn't know was that Kesha Williams had spent the last 6 years preparing for this moment. In the small apartment she shared with her grandmother, Kesha opened a closet that had been locked for years. Inside, meticulously organized, were hundreds of documents, photographs, newspaper clippings, and even recordings. It wasn't obsession. It was a systematic investigation. Since she was 18, after gaining access to the archives of the university where her mother had studied, she had been building a dossier that would make federal investigators proud. "My little granddaughter," Grandma Dorothy said, watching Kesha spread the files across the kitchen table. "Are you sure you're ready for this? That man won't hesitate to hurt you." Kesha smiled, but it was a joyless smile. "Grandma, I've been preparing my whole life. Mom didn't die in an accident, and I'm going to prove it." The phone rang. It was Marcus Thompson, the only investigative journalist who had replied to her emails in the past 2 days. "Kesha, I just got a very interesting call from a lawyer representing David Richardson," Marcus said. "Apparently you're a mentally unstable former employee spreading dangerous slander about a respected business leader." "And what did you tell them?" Kesha asked. Marcus laughed on the other end of the line. "I told them I'd love to hear her side, especially after seeing the video you sent me." The video. Kesha had discreetly recorded Richardson's reaction at the restaurant, the moment he nearly admitted the ideas were her mother's. But that was only the appetizer. The main course had been stored away for 6 years, waiting for the right moment. "Mr. Thompson," Kesha said calmly, What I showed you in the email is just the tip of the iceberg. My mother documented everything, every experiment, every meeting, every private conversation she had with Richardson. You mean audio recordings, email correspondence, backups? Marcus asked. She was suspicious of him in the months before she died, Kesha said. She made backups and sent copies to a trusted third party. Marcus was silent for a moment. As a veteran journalist, he knew when he was on to something big. Kesha, you need to understand Richardson has unlimited resources. He'll try to destroy your credibility, your life, your family. Are you sure you want to go through with this? Kesha's voice was steely. He destroyed my life 21 years ago. I'm just returning the favor. Meanwhile, at Richardson Tech Industries, the mood was all-out war. Richardson had hired a crisis management PR firm and a team of lawyers whose sole mission was to neutralize the threat Kesha posed. I need you to understand, Richardson told the group gathered in his conference room. This woman cannot be underestimated. She was smart enough to provoke me publicly, record my reaction, and now she's trying to blackmail the company. Susan Hartwell, head of public relations, leafed through a report. Mr. Richardson, we've done a thorough background check. Kesha Williams, 24 years old, single, living with her grandmother, limited formal education. She's worked low-skilled jobs her entire life. She's an easy target. Richardson laughed bitterly. That easy target made me look like an idiot in front of billionaire investors. I want her completely destroyed, reputation, credit, ability to work anywhere in this city. What none of them knew was that Kesha had not been alone. Dr. Patricia Collins, a former lab colleague of Amelia Williams and now a full professor of chemistry at the State University, had been the trusted third party who safeguarded the backups for more than 2 decades. When Kesha knocked on Dr. Collins's office door that afternoon, the 65-year-old professor hugged her like a daughter. I wondered when you would come, she said. Your mother told me if anything happened to her, you would eventually ask the right questions. Did you know she didn't die in an accident? Kesha felt a chill. Why didn't you report it? She asked. Dr. Collins sighed. I didn't have enough evidence. Richardson covered his tracks very well. But your mother was brilliant. She predicted he might try something like this. That's why she left these with me. Dr. Collins opened an old safe and took out a small metal box. Inside were 3 flash drives, a sealed envelope, and something that stopped Kesha's heart. Her mother's graduation ring, the ring that should have been cremated with the body they claimed belonged to Amelia. She told me, if anything happens to me, give this to my daughter when she's ready to fight. I think that time has come. As Kesha opened the files on the flash drives, she discovered her mother was far more paranoid and far more brilliant than Kesha had imagined. There were audio recordings of phone conversations in which Richardson clearly pressured Amelia to transfer the rights to her research. There were emails, drafts, lab notes, and timestamps, evidence of a systematic theft. This was more than revenge. It was justice in the making. There were emails where he threatened to take drastic measures if she didn't cooperate. But there was something even Kesha didn't expect, a recording of their last conversation, secretly made in the lab. In the recording, Richardson's voice was cold as ice. Amelia, you can do this the easy way or the hard way, but this technology will be mine, with or without you. Her mother's response was courageous to the very end. David, you can steal my research, but you will never steal my conscience. Someone will find out the truth. Not if no one is alive to tell it. The file ended abruptly. Kesha looked at Dr. Collins, tears streaming down her face. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were the tears of a daughter who finally had the weapons to avenge her mother's death. Richardson made a fatal mistake, Kesha murmured, carefully putting away the flash drives. He thought a black waitress would never be smart enough to connect the dots. Dr. Collins smiled for the first time in years. Your mother always said you had her same determination. I think Richardson is about to learn that underestimating the women of the Williams family is the last mistake anyone can make. That night, as she organized the evidence that would destroy Richardson's empire, Kesha received a threatening message on her phone. Stop now, or the consequences will be permanent. The number was blocked, but she knew exactly who had sent it. Kesha typed a simple reply. My mother sends her regards." For the first time, when that recording revealed her mother's final words to Richardson, all the years of pain and uncertainty finally made sense. But what came next would prove that some revenge is worth waiting 2 decades to execute perfectly. Because while Richardson was mobilizing lawyers and PR experts to crush a waitress, Kesha was orchestrating the most spectacular downfall of a CEO in American corporate history. Marcus Thompson wasn't just an investigative journalist. He was the investigative journalist. He had already taken down 2 corrupt senators and a mayor in the past 5 years. When Kesha showed him Dr. Collins's audio recordings, he immediately knew he was looking at the story of the century. "Kesha," Marcus said on Thursday morning, "you need to understand what we're about to do. This isn't just going to destroy Richardson. It's going to rewrite the history of renewable energy over the last 20 years. The first bomb dropped at 6 a.m. Marcus's article in the New York Chronicle wasn't just a story. It was a complete dossier. The audio recordings were embedded on the website, letting anyone hear Richardson threatening Amelia Williams in his own voice. The documents were digitized and verified by 3 independent laboratories. At the center of it all was a photo of Richardson with Amelia in the lab, dated 6 months before her death. By 6:30 a.m., Richardson's phone was ringing nonstop. By 7 a.m., Richardson Tech Industries stock had plummeted 40%. By 8 a.m., Japanese investors sent an official statement canceling the billion-dollar deal, but Kesha wasn't finished. At 9 a.m., she appeared in front of Richardson Tech Industries, not as a fired waitress, but as the daughter of the true inventor of the solar panels that had made Richardson rich. She wasn't alone. Dr. Patricia Collins stood beside her, holding a folder containing 20 years of documents. Dr. James Morrison, Amelia's former lab colleague and now professor emeritus at MIT, had flown in from Boston to join her. And Marcus Thompson was broadcasting the entire event live on his social media channels. "I come here today not to seek revenge," Kesha declared to the cameras and the swelling crowd, "but to restore the memory of the woman who truly created the technology that saved millions of lives through clean energy. My mother, Dr. Amelia Williams, did not die in an accident. She was murdered because she refused to hand over her life's work to a man who wasn't a third as smart as she was." From the 47th floor, Richardson watched through the glass of his office windows as the crowd gathered below. His lawyers were frantically shouting into phones, but it was like trying to stop a tsunami with an umbrella. "Mr. Richardson," his assistant said as she entered, her face pale. "The FBI is downstairs. They have a search and seizure warrant." Richardson's blood ran cold. "Impossible. There isn't enough evidence to—" "Sir," she interrupted, holding out a tablet. "They have the recordings, all of them. And there are witnesses talking about other cases. Other cases." Richardson knew exactly what she meant. Amelia Williams hadn't been his only victim, just the most important one. Dr. Chun, who had committed suicide after developing a revolutionary battery. Sarah Martinez, who died in a car accident a week before patenting a new wind turbine. Each tragedy had been followed by Richardson unveiling a nearly identical technology months later. At 11 a.m., David Richardson was escorted out of his own building in handcuffs. The images circled the globe within minutes. The man who built an empire on the corpses of true geniuses, now exposed as the fraud and criminal he always was. From the sidewalk, surrounded by reporters, Kesha watched as the man who stole her mother's life was shoved into the back seat of a police car. Richardson looked at her through the window, and for the first time in 21 years, there was no arrogance in his eyes, only fear. Fear of a man who finally understood that he had completely underestimated his opponent. "Ms. Williams," a reporter shouted over the roar of the crowd, "how does it feel to see Richardson arrested?" Kesha took a deep breath, feeling the weight of 2 decades of pain finally lift from her shoulders. "I feel that my mother can finally rest in peace, and that no other brilliant inventor will have their life stolen by predators like David Richardson." The third phase began that very afternoon. The intellectual property lawyers Kesha had secretly consulted over the past few weeks filed 16 simultaneous lawsuits, claiming the rights to every patent Richardson had stolen throughout the years. With the overwhelming evidence presented, it was only a matter of time before his entire tech empire crumbled and credit was restored to the true inventors, or their families. By 6 p.m., Richardson Tech Industries had lost 70% of its value. Investors were fleeing like rats from a sinking ship. And David Richardson, the man who once thought he could intimidate a black waitress with threats and corporate power, was sitting in a federal cell, facing charges of murder, corporate fraud, and conspiracy. That night, Kesha returned home, hugged her grandmother Dorothy, and for the first time in 21 years, cried tears of relief instead of tears of pain. Grandma Dorothy stroked her granddaughter's hair and smiled softly. "Your mother would be so proud of you, girl. So proud." On television, the news continued to broadcast what was already being called the Richardson scandal. But for Kesha, the real victory wasn't seeing her enemy destroyed. It was knowing that Amelia Williams' memory would finally be honored, the way it always deserved. What no one knew yet was that this was only the first stage of something much bigger. Because when you spend 21 years planning justice, you don't stop at revenge. You build something that ensures injustice can never happen again. 6 months later, Kesha Williams was no longer an unemployed waitress struggling to survive. Sitting at the conference table of the newly founded Williams Innovation Institute, a research center dedicated to renewable energy, funded with the $2.3 billion recovered from stolen patents, she watched a new generation of young scientists present their findings. "Today," Kesha said into the microphone at a press conference, "we are announcing our 5th patent this year. Every penny of the profits will be invested in scholarships for students from disadvantaged communities. My mother always believed that knowledge should serve humanity, not enrich predators." Meanwhile, Richardson languished in federal prison, serving 3 life sentences. His former friends in the business elite had deleted his name from their contact lists. His mansion was auctioned off to pay compensation to the families of other victims. His children even changed their last name. At his final hearing, Richardson had begged to speak to Kesha. I just wanted to ask for forgiveness," he stammered through the prison glass. Kesha looked at the man who once thought he could break her. "Mr. Richardson, forgiveness is something you ask for when there's still time to repair the damage. You had 21 years. Marcus Thompson went on to win the Pulitzer Prize for investigative journalism. Dr. Collins was appointed head of the new institute, and Grandma Dorothy at last retired, proudly watching her granddaughter appear on television. Richardson had tried to destroy Kesha, but ended up destroying himself. She had learned that true revenge isn't retaliation for the harm you've suffered. It's achieving success your enemies could never even imagine. And the best part? Every time Richardson turned on the prison television, he saw the name Williams Innovation Institute shining in the headlines, a daily reminder of what happens when you underestimate a daughter determined to honor her mother. If this story of justice touched your heart, subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove the truth always finds its way to the light, no matter how long it takes.